Peace be upon you, 10th graders of Al Mustafa High School. In this video, I am going to explain a poem titled The Daffodills, written by William Wordsworth. Before I start, let me ask you some questions. What do you see in these pictures? Some of you may say flowers, others may say nature, and others may say daffodils. And therefore, this is the aim of our video. We are going to talk about The Daffodills, written by William Wordsworth.
By the end of this lesson, you will be able to analyze the poem and understand its structure as well.
I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of the bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils.
After we have read the poem, it's time to be introduced to the structure of a certain poem. Any poem contains stanzas, sound pattern, rhyme, form, word sounds, figurative devices, theme, and tone. Stanzas are a series of lines grouped together and separated by an empty line from other stanzas. They are the equivalent of a paragraph in an essay. One way to identify a stanza is to count the number of lines, and as you see below, we have the types of stanzas. Now for the form. A poem may or may not have a specific number of lines, rhyme scheme, and/or metrical pattern, but it can still be labeled according to its form or style. Here are the three most common types of poems according to form. Number 1. Lyric poetry. It is any poem with one speaker who expresses strong thoughts and feelings. Most poems, especially modern ones, are lyric poems. Number 2. Narrative poem. It is a poem that tells a story. Its structure resembles the plot line of a story. Number 3. Descriptive poem. It is a poem that describes the world that surrounds the speaker. It uses elaborate imagery and adjectives. While emotional, it is more focused than lyric poetry, which is more personal and introspective. Now, let's move to the analysis of the poem. For the first stanza. In the first stanza, the poem is full of imagery, and Wordsworth describes the scene when he wanders as lonely as a cloud. He compares himself to a single cloud that is floating over the valleys and the hills. The speaker feels distant and separated from the world below. The poet says that he is like the cloud. That's a simile. Then he sees a crowd of golden daffodils, which are under the trees and beside the lake, and are fluttering and dancing in the breeze. He uses calm and soft words. He uses personification when he says that the daffodils are fluttering and dancing. He loves the beauty around him, and it makes him feel complete and happy. He makes the daffodils come alive just for him and have a human-like quality in the way they are behaving. When he sees a crowd of golden daffodils that are under the trees and beside a lake, he makes it seems like the daffodils are people. Every time he is lonely, he will remember when he saw the beautiful daffodils that make him feel less lonely, and his heart will be happily dancing too. In lines 3-4, the connotations come when he says a crowd that is associated with groups of people, while host is associated with angels, because people often refer to host of angels. The second stanza. In the second stanza, the speaker makes a connection with the daffodils and the stars. This stanza is still full of imagery. He compares the daffodils to the shining stars that sparkle in the Milky Way, as the number of daffodils are near the river seem to be thousands in number. He also says that the flowers and the stars were never-ending and continuous, meaning that there were so many that he assumed there were more than thousands. This is an hyperbole or an exaggeration. It reminds him of the Milky Way because there were so many bright flowers grouped together that they seem to be never-ending. He describes them dancing while they toss their heads, which is another personification. The second stanza begins with a simile, comparing the shape and number of the daffodils to the number of stars that we call the Milky Way galaxy. Third stanza. In the third stanza, he compares the waves of the lake to the waves of daffodils. He decides that even though the lake is sparkling, the daffodils win because they have more glee. He felt so happy and expressed his feelings as gay in such a jocund company. He looked at the scene for a long time, but while he was there, he couldn't understand what he had gained from his experience. The repetition of gaze tells us that he kept looking at the flowers for a long time. Although he can see the waves of the river move like it's dancing, it doesn't compare to the way the daffodils are making him feel. The final line of the stanza, in his thanks to nature for providing him with wealth by putting up a show like this. He really enjoyed nature and felt like he belonged there. We know that the speaker is a poet because he tells us in line 15. He speaks in the third person, but we know he is talking about himself. The fourth stanza. In the last stanza, he describes how the scene affected him because whenever he is at home and on his own in the bliss of solitude, he remembers the flowers that fills him with pleasure, and his heart dances with the daffodils. Again, the use of words like bliss show his happiness each time the memory of those flowers and the way they danced the day comes back to him. First, he sets the scene when he sits on his couch, feeling worthless in life, with no great thoughts. Sometimes his mind is empty and vacant, like a bored teenager sitting on the sofa after school. At other times he feels pensive, which means he thinks kind of sad thoughts. It cannot be both vacant and pensive because one means not thinking and the other means thinking while feeling blue. The phrase inward eye means the most interpersonal thoughts of one. Lines 21-24, Wordsworth imagines the daffodils in his spiritual vision, so he uses the metaphor of an inward eye. And of course, not to forget mood and the theme. Let's start with the mood. At the beginning of the poem, the mood of the poet portrayed in the poem was loneliness and sadness. He did this by comparing himself to a single cloud, isolated from the rest. However, clouds usually come together in the sky, but here he describes only a single cloud. I wandered lonely as a cloud. But as the poem progresses, the mood of the poem transitions from sadness or loneliness to happiness. The poet does this by reflecting on a memory of a host of golden daffodils. He constantly mentions the joy and the wealth that the daffodils brought him, and finalizes the poem with a line that shows us that he was happy and no longer lonely, and this was because of the daffodils. And then my heart with pleasure fills and dances with the daffodils.
The theme of the poem centers on the poet's deep love of nature and its profound influence on his life. The poet believes that in nature one could find his identity and the beauty of God's creation. It is a direct communication between the poet and God, reflected in the beauty of the daffodils.